Good evening. Hello, welcome to another Classic Comics livecast. Thank you to everyone who's going to listen in, both during the stream and on a rewatch. So, got a bit of a grab bag this week. James Gunn apparently wasn't a fan of either the Tim Burton or Nolan Batman films. Going to talk about that. Also, former president of Warner Brothers, Diane Nelson, was no fan or admitted that there was no plan for the DCEU, really, around the time of Batman versus Superman. They basically were just pretty much making it up as they went along. And in addition, we're going to talk about the streaming numbers for Ahsoka, yet another lawsuit aimed at Disney. Robin may be appearing in the Batman 2 and some other stuff as well. The first one, and I'll go ahead and start talking about the writer's strike. So there was an offer made by the studios recently to the Writers Guild, and let me bring that up. This is from Hollywood Reporter. Writers Guild replies to studios counteroffer, quote, not nearly enough, end quote. So, the Writers Guild of America is sharing its perspective on the progress of contract negotiations with studios and streamers since they restarted on August 11th. And am I just let me check sound here? Okay, yeah, that sounds good. The company's counter offer is neither nothing nor nearly enough, leadership wrote in an email to members on Wednesday. We will continue to advocate for proposals that fully address our issues rather than accept half measures like those mentioned above and other proposals not listed here. The Guild also included a chart of what it claims the cost to each studio would be annually if it agreed to the WGA's proposals. The update follows a tense back and forth between the union and entertainment companies on Tuesday night. After a meeting that evening between Guild leaders and Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers, President Carol Lombardini, Netflix co-CEO Ted Sarandos, Warner Brothers Discovery CEO David Zaslav, Disney CEO Bob Iger, and Universal Filmed Entertainment Group Chairman Donna Langley, the studios issued a 6-page document detailing their August 11th offer to the union. Quote, our priority is to end the strike so that valued members of the creative community can return to what they do best and to end the hardships that so many people and businesses that service the industry are experiencing, Lombardini said in an accompanying statement. The union did not take kindly to this approach, shooting back a response on Tuesday near midnight that claimed the proposal, quote, failed to sufficiently protect writers and saying the AMPTP was seeking, quote, not to bargain, but to jam us, unquote. And I'm sure jam us is the polite way of putting it. The industry has been in suspense since the studios and the union got back to the bargaining table on August 11th after more than 100 days of the writer strike. The two sides have been meeting on and off ever since, leading many to hope an agreement was within reach. The WGA's full memo to members on August 24th is below. Do I want to read this whole thing? There's a good bit here. I guess I'll read it all. So, where does it start? Okay. During the meeting with the CEOs, we spent 2 hours explaining that though progress had been made, the language of the AMPTP's offer was, as is typical of that body, a version of giving with one hand and taking back with the other. We repeated what we have said since day one, that our demands come directly from the membership itself. They address the existential threats to the profession of writing and to our individual careers, all caused by changes to the business model implemented by the companies in the last 7 to 10 years. We stressed that we could not and would not pick and choose among those threads, that we have not struck for nearly 4 months to half save ourselves, nor are we leaving any sector of this guild unprotected when we return to work. We are willing to negotiate within those areas, but every existential issue must be met with a genuine solution. At the end of the meeting, the companies told us they intended to go directly to our membership by releasing information on their August 11th proposal to the media within the next 24 hours. They released a 6-page document 20 minutes after the meeting concluded. This should be seen as what it is, simply a tactic in the middle of an ongoing negotiation. We aren't going to negotiate by press release, so won't go through the AMPTP's characterization of its August 11th proposal in detail, but here are some broad strokes that may already be apparent. Many of the current deal points they have put forward, minimums, SVOD residuals, AVOD terms, are from a deal negotiated with the DGA more than 80 days ago. Member power, the strike, forced the companies to negotiate on more issues than they were willing to as of May 1st, but still in the typical AMPTP mode of seeming to give while limiting the actual gains. Here are a few examples of areas they've made proposals that are not yet good enough. In screen, they have proposed a second step, but only for a statistically tiny category of screenwriters, excluding all but the first writers of original screenplays. They dismissed the concept of weekly pay. They have seated selected but insufficient minimum terms for some but not all Appendix A writers in SVOD. And I believe SVOD is streaming video on demand. Isn't that what that would be? For example, while comedy variety is covered, game show writers, daytime writers, and all other Appendix A writers are not covered. In television, the companies have introduced the notion of an MBA guarantee of minimum staff size and duration, but the loopholes, limitations, and omissions in their proposal, too numerous to single out, make them effectively toothless. Teams of 2 writers would receive P&H contributions as individuals, but not teams of 3 or more. We have had real discussions and seen movement on their part regarding AI protections, but we are not yet where we need to be. As one example, they continue to refuse to regulate the use of our work to train AI to write new content for a motion picture. Finally, the companies say they have made a major concession by offering us 6 WGA staff to study limited streaming viewership data for the next 3 years so we can return in 2026 to ask once again for a viewership based residual. In the meantime, no writer can be told by the WGA about how well their project is doing, much less receive a residual based on that data. Company's counteroffer is neither nothing nor nearly enough. Blah, blah. Okay, I already read that part. One last reminder illustrates why the AMPTP's current stance doesn't make sense, as we have repeated from the first day of our member meeting and on every day of the strike. Our demands are fair and reasonable, and the companies can afford them. Here's the cost each company of our current asks on the table, including the addition of increased health funding to address the impact of the strike. And then, of course, they give costs here for what? Disney, Netflix, Warner Brothers, Discovery, Paramount, NBC, Universal, Amazon, Sony, Apple. I mean, you can see the numbers here if you want to go over. I'm not going to go them because obviously they're going to give numbers that favor their argument, and they're probably right. You know, it's not like the companies can't afford this; they surely can. But you get the idea. As you see here, I mean, these are all tiny fractions of their revenue. Less than 1% in every case. Weigh this against the cost of not making a deal. It costs the cost to 11,500 writers, to actors, crews, and drivers, to anyone who works in around the business but is not on strike, to the economies of California and New York and everywhere film and television is made, to consumers, pension plans, and other shareholders, and to the companies themselves. It makes no sense that everybody but the AMPTP knows it. In the last 36 hours, the response from the membership is that you are undeterred by this latest tactic. Despite the AMPTP's attempt at a detour around us, we remain committed to direct negotiations with the companies. That's actually how a deal gets made and the strike ends. That will be good for the rest of the industry and the companies as well. Until then, we will see you on the picket lines. So clearly, I mean, it's not going to end anytime soon. There's still a lot of issues they have to sort out. One thing I think might be interesting is because again, they mention coming back to negotiations in 2026. Where was it? Where was that? Oh, here it is. The companies say they have made a major concession by offering to allow six WGA staff to study limited streaming viewership data for the next 3 years so we can return in 2026 to ask again for a viewership based residual. In other words, they're saying, we're not going to show you all the numbers, but for the next 3 years, we'll let you have some numbers, limited numbers. Obviously, the information they want them to have. So you can study them and come up with a good idea of how we should give you residuals in the next bargain, say in 2026. I would bet you anything that what they're really planning to do is this is just a stalling tactic. And when it comes around 2026, they're just going to say, you know what? By that point, the AI will be good enough. They'll be like, you know what? We don't really need to bring you guys back. We'll just have the AI do it. So here's what we're offering, take it or leave it. That's probably closer to what's going to happen. Okay. What I got next here? Okay. So, and this is from GameRant.com. James Gunn's 11-year-old Facebook comments on previous Batman films resurface. And boy, he's stirred up a hornet's nest with this. All right, James Gunn continues to get himself in hot water with DC fans. This time it was caused by comments he made over a decade ago about Tim Burton and Christopher Nolan's Batman films. When Gunn was made CEO of DC Studios, it divided the fan base between those who believed he would be DC's savior and those who thought he would be the final nail in the coffin. Gunn has been active on social media, which has been good for fans to get updates on upcoming DCU projects. However, Gunn's recent comments on Superman Legacy reignited some hate around the decision to recast Henry Cavill. I talked about this last week, I believe. Now, Gunn is receiving backlash for a rant that he went on 11 years ago about Burton and Nolan's Batman movies on his Facebook page. The comments, which have since been removed from the account, say, quote, the Tim Burton Batman movie is poorly written. The soundtrack is the worst work of everyone involved. And it is absolutely one of the most boring films ever, unquote. Gunn stated in another comment, quote, oh yeah, and Jack Nicholson as the Joker is Jack Nicholson in The Shining with shitty clown makeup. Fuck you, everyone involved in that travesty, unquote. Although Gunn was tough on Burton's Batman, he also made negative comments about Nolan's first two films in the Dark Knight trilogy. Quote, I have problems with both of Nolan's films. Hello, Derpy Entertainment. Thank you for stopping by, man. Or, let's see, honestly, the past is the past, but true or false, I can actually agree. The only thing I don't agree with is the Danny Elfman score. Yeah, I mean, I don't know what his reasoning is that it's the worst work that Elfman has done. I mean, honestly, a lot of Elfman's scores sound the same to me. They sound very similar. So where was I? Okay. Okay. Quote. So I have problems with both of Nolan's films. I don't think either one is classic, and I don't even really think Batman Begins is good. Gunn continues, but they're far superior to the first Batman. Unquote. Gunn was nicer to the Nolan movies than the Burton movies, but still harsh to films considered some of the best comic movies ever made. This has angered fans of those films and people who are not fans of Gunn's leadership of DC Studios already. Some fans now wonder what it means for the DCU if Gunn believes these movies are awful and box office bomb The Flash was one of the quote greatest superhero movies ever unquote. There are some concerns about what Gunn considers a good movie. Look, Gunn doesn't really think The Flash was good. He just, he was put up to that by the studio, I'm sure. They wanted to try and sell this movie to the public. So he and everyone else connected with DC Studios was trying to talk this up as it was some great movie. Remember, didn't they at one point claim that Tom Cruise had seen it and he thought it was the best movie or something? I mean, come on, who believes that? Gunn's fans believe that the comments about these past Batman movies are from a fake account, although they came from his personal account linked to his official Facebook account. Others believe he is entitled to his opinion and made some valid points about past Batman movies. Gunn has removed those comments from the page, but the damage might already be done. Yeah, I mean, look, he's free to his opinion. Um, I mean, with the Burton movies, it's sort of a matter of taste. They're obviously, although they're darker than the West movies, they are quite campy in their own ways. And like I really like them, but I can understand how certain people who have certain ideas about Batman and what it should be wouldn't like that. That it veers too much into being goofy, it's too stylized, a little too surreal, stuff like that. But I'm really kind of puzzled by how much he if he's criticizing The Dark Knight, because Batman Begins, look, I like Batman Begins, but Batman Begins is kind of slow. It takes a while to get going. In fact, ever since I first saw the movie, I've watched parts of it several times, but I don't think I've ever really sat through the whole movie since then, because it's kind of it's kind of a bit of a slog to sit through. I like the movie, but I can understand if that's his complaint about it. The Dark Knight, I don't get. Dark Knight is a masterpiece as far as I'm concerned, but obviously, opinions differ. Um, but yeah, it does make you wonder, what does he consider a really good comic book movie? Especially, it's not even so much a comic book movie, but what does he consider a good Batman movie? Or more to the point, a good Superman movie? Now, I remember him having comments where he talked about the Donner films and said that those were providing inspiration to some degree. So that would seem to make me think that he at least doesn't think those movies are trash, which is good. But yeah, he's really just continuing to make things more difficult for himself. All right. And we got another Batman related story here. Let me bring this up. Hold on. There it is. Okay. And this is from IGN. Derpy says the Dark Knight trilogy as whole is only remembered by Ledger's performance because Nolan's writing style. Yeah, I mean, I think his performance as the Joker is a big part of it. Yeah, I do agree with that. Um, and it kind of speaks to, and I've said this before, and I think I said it on my stream last week, that really, and these kind of serialized film franchises where you've got a hero that doesn't really change much. And again, initially I was talking about Bond, but it same goes with superheroes. You could probably say the same thing for like Indiana Jones. It's that, since the hero doesn't change much from film to film, he doesn't really have much of an arc as such, then it's really even more important for the villains to be compelling and to hold your interest, because that's really what's going to keep you coming back, is the villains more than the hero. Derpy says Pattinson's Batman should not have a Robin. Yeah, Robin seems kind of a weird fit for a way they're setting up this universe. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't really scream, because it's such a grounded, relatively speaking, it's relatively grounded, relatively realistic. And so for that, to bring in a kid to be fighting crime, it doesn't lend itself to it so much. Yeah, I've heard that it's going to be Clayface maybe in the next film. I don't get that, because in the Batman, they clearly seem to be setting some things up. They clearly seem to be setting up the Court of Owls in part, it seemed to me. and also Bane, because there's that scene where he's fighting up on the catwalks and he injects himself with something, and it seems to be like venom or something like that, some kind of you know steroid that he juices himself with, and then he goes berserk and beats the crap out of these people. And so I thought, okay, they're setting up Venom, which obviously that means Bane somewhere down the line. And then there was they mentioned in the movie that I forget how it, but somehow or another, you remember they said in the movie that Bruce Wayne was in bed with the organized crime, and at one point, basically, they had killed some people on Wayne's behalf, and they mentioned one of them was God, I'm forgetting Hush's real name now, but it was Hush's father was one of the people killed, and that seemed to be obviously setting up Hush for maybe a sequel. So for them to then go with Clayface, I'm kind of like, really? Kind of odd. And for what it's worth, they probably won't. But if they do Clayface, I would really hope they would do the Bronze Age version of Clayface, because I think he would fit this style of Batman better. And of course, I mean, the one most people think of is the shape shifting Matt Hagen Clayface, who's really more the Silver Age version. The Bronze Age version, who was introduced in the late 70s, Preston Payne, that was his real name. And he was a guy who he got a hold of some of Hagen's blood or his DNA or something, and he had some sort of glandular condition, like, I don't know, Cushing's disease or Addison's disease or something. So he was really kind of weird looking and unattractive, and he got some of Hagen's DNA or whatever, and he created a serum and gave it to himself, hoping it would allow him to change shape so he could make himself handsome. But it didn't work, and it sort of made him into this kind of, it gave him this kind of Clayface appearance where he kind of had a Clayface look, but he couldn't shapeshift. It just made him worse. It just made him even more horrific. And he actually had to wear this like exoskeleton to sort of hold his body together. And if he touched people, he actually would kill them. He would dissolve people just like touching them. And he was batshit crazy. I mean, he was totally insane. And that'd be a real good version of Clayface to do for the Batman sequel. If they were doing it, it would make more sense. But I'm sure they'll just do the Matt Hagen version because that's the one everybody knows. Derpy says, yeah, I'd rather Gunn do Court of Owls. Yeah, it makes more sense. Mr. Freeze, maybe. I hope it's during Christmas. If it's Mr. Freeze, you hope it's during Christmas. Yeah, that would make sense. Okay, anyway, let's get on to this here. Batman 2, next installment from Matt Reeves, might see the introduction of Robin the Boy Wonder. The Batman, which released in 2022, was a phenomenal success. I don't know about phenomenal. I mean, it did okay. What it made, so it made about 770, which is actually pretty comparable to Batman Begins. The thing is, Batman Begins was like 15 years earlier, and ticket prices were cheaper back then. So just to get the same amount of sales, the original Batman Begins had to sell significantly more tickets. And these days, of course, the budgets are much more expensive. I mean, I think Batman did okay. I think it turned a profit, but just not by a lot. Calling it a phenomenal success is that's pretty much hype. Through the brilliant screenplay, direction, cinematography, and performances by the cast, the film was a blockbuster in the global box office. It managed to rake in more than 770 million, which also made it the seventh highest grossing film of 2022. Due to the success of the previous film, the next installments for the series has been greenlit by the studio. These will take place in the Elseworlds, which, stated by James Gunn, will be separate from the broader DC universe. So now many fans are wondering what they can expect from the Batman 2. Fans have been hoping for a live-action Robin to make his first appearance in the recent live-action movies. The only live-action Robin we have seen in recent times is Brenton Thwaites' Dick Grayson from the Titans series. In the film department, last we heard about the Boy Wonder was him being mentioned toward the end of Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy. Naturally, okay, what is Derpy says? I'll be real. I think Pattinson's the best Batman because it felt like year one the entire time. But that's because I'm a big fan of year one heavily. Year one's an excellent story, and yeah, it does have some year one elements to it. I felt like he was actually a better Batman than he was Bruce Wayne, which surprised me. I would have thought the opposite. But I actually liked him better as Batman than I did as Bruce Wayne, which was kind of again, I was expecting that to be the opposite. Naturally, many fans are now eager to see what the dynamic duo can add to the big screen. We have already seen hints that could point towards Robin being introduced in the next film. Firstly, we saw Pattinson's Bruce Wayne take interest in the orphans of Gotham. We also heard about Zoe Kravitz's Catwoman moving to Bloodhaven towards the end of the film, which is the city Robin moves to as Nightwing. Therefore, it might be the perfect time to introduce the Boy Wonder and Matt Reeves as the Batman too. I don't know what Catwoman going to Bloodhaven really has to do with it. The only issue is the execution, as we saw in Pattinson's Batman in his first few years as a Cape Crusader in the first film. So introducing Robin with Batman still learning his path could be a challenge, but we would surely love to see his character being set up for a future installment. Hmm. I mean, there's not much to that. I mean, they don't even. I mean, that's I almost regret even bringing this up now because they don't even cite any rumors or anything. It's just like, well, I guess they could bring Robin in. Eh. Okay. Now, as long as we're on the subject of DC Studios and DC Films, let me bring up this story. So, a former president of Warner Brothers has had some interesting things to say about the early days of the DCEU slash Snyderverse. So, this is from Bleeding Cool. DC Comics president thought Joss Whedon's Justice League was terrible. Former DC president Diane Nelson talked about, quote, the single biggest thing that made us look amateurish, certainly relative to Marvel, if not just on its own. David Maisel, former vice chairman, president of Marvel Studios, and CEO of Marvel Entertainment, was the man who pitched the concept of Marvel Studios to Avi Arad and Ike Perlmutter, financing and producing its own movies in a connected cinematic universe, and who also sold Marvel to Disney. Currently, he is a partner in Mythos Studios, which owns Aspen Comics and the rights to Fathom, Soulfire, and Cupid as part of the Mythosverse. Yeah, good luck with that. I mean, I've heard of Fathom. I know who Fathom is, and I've heard of Soulfire. Cupid, I don't know about that. But even at his height at Marvel Studios, he feared DC Comics. Quote, I was afraid of DC, and their model was hiring Final Cut directors, and sometimes that works. And you could get a Chris Nolan movie, and sometimes it doesn't, right? Quote, unquote, because Marvel was, quote, a team effort, and the producers were Marvel Studios, and as Marvel Studios, we needed directors and writers and talent that wanted to be part of a team and a culture. But handing over the keys to a Final Cut director, I don't know how, as a producer, that is physically or a creatively responsible decision, unquote. Back in July, the Wall Street Journal's podcast, The Journal, hosted by Kate Linbaugh and Ryan Knutson, ran a series of episodes by Ben Fritz looking at the rise of Marvel Studios from comic book publisher to film studio to Disney purchase and the executive and creator battles within. It made a few headlines, but there are lots of gems that seem to be missed, such as Marvel's initial relationship with Sony Pictures, which led by our favorite Marvel executives Avi Arad and Ike Perlmutter, to toy manufacturers who took over the comic book company and made it profitable again. Catch up on more of our coverage with this tag. Yeah, so back in the late 80s or late 90s rather, when the comic book, the speculator boom, the investing speculator boom created kind of a bubble in the comic book industry in the mid 90s. And then around, I don't know, 97 or so, I think, 96, 97, the bubble burst. And as a result of that, comic sales really dropped. And around that time, Marvel Comics went bankrupt. And they were bought by Toy Biz, which was manufacturing action figures at the time. And yeah, and they got Marvel turned around and got them profitable again. And they were the ones who sort of started getting Marvel movies made. DC President Diane Nelson compared DC unfavorably to Marvel. As well as David Maisel talking about DC's approach compared to Marvel, they also spoke to an old friend of Bleeding Cool, the former president of DC Entertainment, Diane Nelson, who was there for the whole Zack Snyder Justice League debacle at Warner Brothers for 22 years and president for 9. She had some issues regarding the Marvel DC comparison, too. Diane Nelson says, quote, certainly there was an undercurrent of frustration that we were not hitting the mark. We were not a standalone studio the way Marvel was. They were a freestanding studio with their own production budgets and their own production staff. They were really charting their own course and they did an amazing job of it. The fans assumed that we at Warner Brothers were replicating the organizational structure of Marvel. In fact, we did not, and it was quite intentional. I don't know that there was an appreciation for the extent to which the DC team really just had a seat at the table. We would have the heads of each of the relevant businesses in DC to talk about DC related issues, including our slate of films and TV shows, video games, and so forth. But DC was not the one leading that charge. And honestly, I'm not sure there was anyone leading that charge. It just wasn't the culture of Warner Brothers to dictate a particular strategy. Marvel Studios pioneered the idea of a slate of upcoming films and TV shows displayed for fans that showed a planned rollout of connected stories, and Warner Brothers followed suit for DC's movies. But Diane Nelson wasn't happy. Quote, the idea of a slate just felt like window dressing. The bottom line is there never was a thoughtful, well controlled, confidential slate process. And I think it's the single biggest thing that made us look amateurish, certainly relative to Marvel, if not just on its own. In other words, there was no plan. There really was no plan. When they rolled out, that graphic they had, that Marvel style graphic that had all the movie titles spread out over like the next 5-6 years or whatever. Oh, this is when Wonder Woman's coming out, and Suicide Squad, and Justice League, and Flash, and Green Lantern Corps, and all that. That was just BS. They were just kind of winging it. They had no plan. And in the fan press, with Zack Snyder directing Man of Steel, Batman vs. Superman, Justice League 1 and 2, and with his films setting up and spinning off into Suicide Squad, Wonder Woman, Flash, Cyborg, and more, Snyder was regarded in the same way that Kevin Feige was at Marvel. Diane Nelson pushed back against that. And this is where Snyder fans aren't going to be happy hearing this. Quote, unless there were meetings that happened that no one told me about, which is possible, I don't know that there was ever any conversation where it was decided that Zack would be leading the DC slate for any particular period of time. So even if it wasn't a conscious decision that Zack Snyder was our Kevin Feige, from a consumer standpoint, that's kind of what happened for a while. There's a place for Zack's movies, and I would have always wanted Zack to be a part of the DC lineup. But should he have been the one defining that universe? Maybe not. In hindsight, it's a hard question, unquote. And then there was what happened after Zack Snyder delivered his version of Justice League. There was a desire to ensure that the movie was not too long and that there was an opportunity for more heart and humor. And then, oh, we're going to bring in another director to help. That would be Joss Whedon, who would heavily rewrite, recut, re-edit, and shoot new footage, including the now infamous CGI Superman lip where Henry Cavill had grown a mustache he couldn't shave for filming Mission Impossible. And what did Diane think of what they got? Quote, my characterization is Joss was a bit of a shiny penny during a time when they were looking for something shiny to grab onto. Yeah, I mean, I thought the final film was terrible. Yeah, I mean, I would have preferred a darker than I wanted or longer than I'd hoped for Zack Snyder cut than the Frankenstein cut we got in theaters. The Trinity characters of Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman should have, by any measure, blown away any other superhero movie, and they didn't, unquote. I agree with that completely. I agree with that completely. I think the biggest criticism and the biggest I don't know how to say it, but the biggest thing you can point to say that they fumbled the rollout of these DC films completely is that out of all these films they made, starting with Man of Steel and coming up to now, their two biggest films were Aquaman and the Joker, which both made over $1 billion. And yet somehow Superman and Batman movies haven't. That more than anything points to how they have screwed this up. Let's see. A terrible final film, a Frankenstein cut. Diane looks back saying, quote, "There are so many things I would do differently. I certainly think that DC would have benefited. The company would have benefited much more strongly had DC been its own independent entity with its own ability to mandate and set a slate and a vision for its properties. Whomever ran it, it needed to report to the CEO, and it, I believe, should have been set up independently the way Marvel was with its own budgets and so forth. A few years later, we would get Zack Snyder's Justice League director's cut so everyone could judge for themselves and come to precisely the same conclusion as Diane Nelson." Okay, and that's all there. So, yeah, I mean, she's basically admitting it was all a mess and they didn't really know what they were doing. And surprisingly, that DC Studios had actually very little agency when it came to trying to say what should be in these movies or how the character should be depicted, etc. Okay. And of course, I'm going to talk about some Disney stuff, so we'll get to that. So we had Ahsoka that hit streaming recently. Let's take a look at that. Let me bring that. This is from the direct.com. All right. Uh, New data reveals Ahsoka's weak viewership versus Star Wars other shows. Newly revealed data suggests that Ahsoka saw weaker viewership data compared to previous Star Wars Disney Plus projects. While Ahsoka seems to be hitting the spot for many critics and viewers, some previously voiced concerns that the show might be less accessible to those who have not seen all of its animated Star Wars Rebels series. Even Rosario Dawson, the actor behind Ahsoka Tano herself, admitted that the series is basically season 5 of Rebels. Sabine's Natasha Lou Bordizzo, is that a real name, Bordizzo? Also shared that seeing Rebels before diving into the upcoming show would, quote, add more weight to everything, unquote. While the effect of its Rebels connections remains up for debate, at the very least, it doesn't look like Ahsoka will be breaking any records. Viewership data from Samba TV revealed that 1.2 million households watched Ahsoka over the course of its first 6 days on Disney Plus. Comparatively, the Book of Boba Fett had 1.9 million viewers in its first 6 days. Obi-Wan Kenobi mustered up 2.14 million in its first 4 days. As for The Mandalorian, the flagship show pulled in 2.08 million in its first 4 days of its season 2 premiere, while season 3 got only 1.6 million within that time frame. So for season 2 of The Mandalorian, you had 2.8 million in the first 4 days. And I'm guessing that's up from the first season. I don't know, but I'm guessing it was. And then went to 1.9 million for Boba Fett. Boba Fett came out before Obi-Wan, right? Yeah. Then up to 2.14 for Obi-Wan Kenobi, and, and now about half that for Ahsoka. The new Samba TV post also noted that Ahsoka's numbers were only slightly lower than the Mandalorian season 3 premiere when looked at over its first 6 days. It's important to point out that some of these metrics look at a different span of days. The Mandalorian and Obi-Wan are 4, while the Book of Boba Fett and Ahsoka are 6. Oh, okay. Oddly enough, Samba TV did not cover Andor, so there aren't concrete numbers to pit directly against Ahsoka. That said, the original tweet revealed these new stats did mention that the viewership is, quote, similar to Andor's season premiere, whatever that means. Disney has also released its own viewership numbers for Ahsoka's premiere episode, boasting that the series accrued 14 million viewers for episode 1 during its first week of release on the streamer. The company suggests that these are impressive numbers for Disney Plus, with the company further revealing that the episode was the most watched title on the service that week globally. However, it's worth noting that Disney has not previously released its own viewing numbers for other comparable programming, and that these numbers are for the first episode alone, making it slightly more difficult to determine how these numbers fare against other shows on the platform. For additional reference, here are the numbers relating to the first 5 days of release for Marvel Studios Disney Plus projects. So what do we got? We got Loki, 2.5 million. Moon Knight and Falcon and the Winter Soldier both had 1.8 million. WandaVision, 1.6. I'm surprised WandaVision isn't higher. There was so much hype for that. Hawkeye, 1.5 million. She-Hulk, 1.5 million. I'm surprised She-Hulk is that high. Secret Invasion, 994,000, and Ms. Marvel, 775,000. It's worth noting that, per usual, this data is not just specifically those who have select smart TVs opted in. While many will be quick to try and paint a bleak picture about Disney's latest Star Wars series, there is one key difference between Ahsoka and the rest of the franchise's previous Disney Plus outings. None of those two were dealing with two historic strikes in the entertainment industry. Because of the WGA and SAG-AFTRA strikes, none of the talent behind Ahsoka has been able to talk about or promote the series. This means the show is not making it to as many television sets as it might otherwise. Considering that situation, Ahsoka's premiere could have easily done better than The Mandalorian's recent season and certainly higher than Andor, though it was likely never going to reach the same heights that Obi-Wan Kenobi did due to that character's notable popularity. While 1.2 million isn't anything to brag about, it isn't a complete failure, especially when taking into account the landscape of the entertainment industry today. Hopefully, the powers that be at Lucasfilm don't take away the wrong message from the show's supposed weak viewership. Ahsoka only just began, yet now fans will start worrying that the much desired season 2 might never happen. Might never happen. Much desired by who? Not by me, that's for sure. Yeah, I haven't watched Ahsoka. I have no plans to. I don't care about the show. I mean, she was okay on Clone Wars, and she was okay in Rebels. What little I watched of Rebels, I didn't watch a lot of that. But she's not a character that's important to me or that I care about, and I'm certainly not interested in this kind of bastardized knockoff of Heir to the Empire that they're trying to do with her and Thrawn. All right. Okay, here's another Disney-related one. Speaking of striking, or of workers in Hollywood anyway, and this is from Hollywood Reporter. VFX workers at Disney file for unionization under IATSE. Visual effects workers at Walt Disney Pictures have filed for an election with the National Labor Relations Board that could allow them to unionize with IATSE. And IATSE, trying to remember what IATSE stands for. I can't remember what the acronym IATSE is for. The news comes as Disney-owned Marvel VFX workers are currently organizing their own union election amid the writers' and actors' strikes. Already, roughly 80% of the 18 in-house VFX workers, including data wranglers, witness camera operators, and other production staff at Walt Disney Pictures, have signed union authorization cards affirming their desire to unionize under, oh, here it is, International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees. That's what it stands for. The union reports. Both Disney and Marvel unionization efforts involve pros employed directly by the studios that currently do not cover the thousands of artists who work on Marvel movies through third party VFX studios. After filing with the NLRB, an election could occur in 2 to 3 weeks for these Disney workers, according to IATSE. If a majority of workers vote to unionize, the studio, which didn't voluntarily recognize the effort, according to the union, would then be called upon to begin good faith negotiations for a union contract. Disney didn't immediately respond to a request for comment. Workers are calling for, quote, fair compensation for all hours worked, adequate health care, retirement benefits, and more generally, the same rights and protections afforded to their unionized coworkers who are already represented by IATSE, according to the union. Quote, today, courageous visual effects workers at Walt Disney Pictures overcame the fear and silence that have kept our community from having a voice on the job for decades, with an overwhelming supermajority of these crews demanding an end to the way VFX has always been. This is a clear sign that our campaign is about not about one studio or corporation. It's about VFX workers across the industry using the tools at our disposal to uplift ourselves and forge a better path forward, said IATSE organizer Mark Patch. Last week, Marvel's in-house visual effects workers began to vote on whether they wish to unionize. Workers will need to return their ballots by a September 11th deadline. A supermajority of Marvel's roughly 50 VFX crew had already signed authorization cards. Currently, VFX jobs are largely non-union, and IATSE has recently been making a bigger push to bring those workers under their banner. IATSE's idea is to form a new national VFX local that would cover VFX workers, whether they are employed directly by the studios, the production, or third party VFX companies. Patch tells THR that assuming the Marvel and Disney votes pass, the union hopes to charter and launch the VFX local before the end of the year. The majority of VFX workers should be able to find their home in this new union, he says. The aim would be to have members of such a local work under the basic agreement contract already used by entertainment workers in 13 locals, including the International Cinematographers Guild and Motion Pictures Editors Guild, according to Patch. The current basic agreement expires in 2024, and negotiations for a new contract are expected to begin next March. Huh. So expect a strike among VFX workers next March, more than likely. Let's see. Where am I at? Okay, 7:48. So I'll go to about 8. I usually go about an hour. So that's probably what, about two more stories I'll cover here. Okay, this is another Disney related one. Again, this is Hollywood Reporter. Marvel shuffles TV calendar with new dates for Agatha, Echo, and X-Men 97. Oh no, they're shuffling Agatha. What will we do? No. Marvel Studios has shuffled or reshuffled the release dates for its slate of television shows. What If, Echo, and Agatha Coven of Chaos, now titled Agatha Darkhold Diaries, are among the titles receiving new dates. The move comes amid Hollywood strikes as well as a general pullback at Disney Plus. A writer's strike began May 2nd, while the actors went on strike July 14th, significantly impacting production and development. At the same time, sources say Marvel wants to focus its efforts to make each title an event for fans and audiences. The studio has decided that spreading out its content is a more prudent strategy. It's a far cry from last year's San Diego Comic-Con, when Marvel unveiled plans for Phase 5 and Phase 6 of its movies and television shows. 2023 was particularly heavy with shows, with 5 planned. Only the spring's Secret Invasion, October's Loki, and, as the Hollywood Reporter can reveal, What If Season 2 remain on that plan for this year. DHR poked around the Marvel scheduling changes, and here's what sources say is the new rundown. As previously announced, Loki Season 2 will be the only show to hit this fall, debuting on Disney Plus on October 6th. Expectations remain high for the Tom Hiddleston, Owen Wilson fronted series that centers on alternate timelines. Let me get rid of this. There we go. The season 2 trailer had the biggest digital debut of a trailer for any Disney Plus series, and season 1 remains the most watched Marvel series on Disney Plus. Really interesting. The second season of Emmy winning animated series What If will debut around Christmas Day. Although it should be noted that the animated show is not a holiday themed series. Like the namesake comic on which its premise is based, What If is an anthology series that looks at key moments in the Marvel Cinematic Universe and how they would look in different timelines. Jeffrey Wright returns as the voice of the Watcher, the alien narrator. What If was originally slated for an early 2023 release. Echo, a spinoff from last year's hit Hawkeye, was originally announced for November 29th, but has now shifted to January of 2024. Series star Alaqua Cox as a one-time head of a criminal organization who returns to her hometown in Oklahoma to come to terms with her past. The series, which centers on a character who is deaf and of Native American descent, is described as having a grittier and more grounded tone than some of the other Marvel series, and will feature appearances by Daredevil and Kingpin. As previously announced, all the episodes will drop at the same time. It'll probably wind up being darker and grittier than Daredevil. How much you want to bet? Next on the schedule will be X-Men 97, the animated series that acts as a spiritual and tonal continuation of the classic 1990s cartoon that aired on Fox. The series, first announced in 2021, was originally planned for a fall 2023 debut, but will now premiere in early 2024. The show is being described by two sources who have seen it as retro and a love letter to the original, as season two remains in the works. Agatha, the WandaVision spinoff starring Catherine Hahn, was originally announced for a winter 2023 release and has been pushed back to early fall 2024, where it will serve as a lead up to the Halloween holiday. Okay, I can see that. That makes sense. I mean, if you're going to do an Agatha show, then that is a good time to put it out. I will give them that. The show, which completed its filming before the strikes, was previously titled Agatha House of Harkness and then Agatha Coven of Chaos before falling on its current name, Agatha Darkhold Diaries. Ironheart, a show focused on genius inventor Riri Williams, first introduced in Black Panther Wakanda Forever, was to have dropped this fall, but now that show is off the schedule. Uh-oh. It finished shooting, but its completion is affected by the strikes. Oh, okay. So they're still doing it. It's probably just, it's not far enough along that they have any idea when it's actually going to get done. Daredevil Born Again, a continuation of the Netflix series in the MCU. Don't believe that. That's BS. Don't believe for a minute this is a continuation of the Netflix series. They're ditching everybody from that show except Charlie Cox. And they're going to have a completely different supporting cast. And I can guarantee they've all but admitted that this one's going to be more like other Marvel shows. It's going to be goofier. It's going to be sillier. It is not a continuation of the Netflix series. That's BS. It was expected to debut in spring 2024 and is paused in mid-production amid the strikes. Wonder Man, starring Yahya Abdul-Mateen II, was also paused in mid-production. It's unclear when on the calendar the three series will end up. Well, we won't know until the strikes are over, I'm sure. All righty. So I guess I got time for one more here, and then we will wrap up. So what do I want to cover here? Okay, I'll talk about this one with Mark Millar here. He's been making some news lately. So this is from Bounding Into Comics. Mark Millar claims the superhero movie genre ended after Avengers Endgame, posits Marvel and DC are trying to course correct. I mean, that's not exactly a revelation. Or Mark Millar. I keep wanting to pronounce his name Millar, but because that's how I pronounced it forever, but it's Miller. Mark Miller, the creator of Kick-Ass, Kingsman, Wanted, Super Crooks, and Civil War, recently shared that he believes the superhero movie genre ended with Avengers Endgame, but claims that Marvel and DC are trying to course correct after a number of subpar entries. Miller recently spoke with the New York Times about his upcoming live action adaptation, The Chosen One, on Netflix, which is based on his American Jesus comic book series. While discussing the series, he also touched on the history of the superhero movie genre, saying, these movies generally weren't very good prior to 1999. They were usually made by people who didn't understand or care about the material, with two exceptions Richard Donner with Superman and Tim Burton with Batman. Well, don't tell James Gunn that. He continued, so it was amazing in 1999 when Marvel cracked the code and made these things great. It wasn't just that the technology caught up to the material, it was that the people who made these movies treated them with real dignity. However, he then shared that the genre ended with Endgame. Quote, the genre had a great run and kind of ended in 2019 with Avengers Endgame. That felt like the truly last great superhero movie. As for why he believes it ended with Endgame, despite a plethora of Marvel Studios productions as well as DC films coming out since then, he explained, quote, everything since then, I feel that the people involved haven't loved the material the way that Sam Raimi loves Spider-Man, or Christopher Nolan, who read 50 years worth of Batman comics before he started doing Batman. I mean, I don't think Nolan loves the material. I think he respects the material, and I think he's a professional and wants to do a good job. And he's very intelligent. I don't know that he loves Batman necessarily. While he believes the genre ended with Avengers Endgame, he does think that Marvel and DC are attempting to course correct. Quote, I think it will come back. These movies made too much money for them to fail. What I know from talking to friends at DC and Marvel is there's a massive course correct being planned. They need to get it back on track. Getting some people with an interesting voice again is critical, he said. He then asserted, quote, every director who did a superhero movie for the first 10 to 15 years had success on the entertainment scene before that. Finally, Miller concluded, quote, and unexpected choices were made as opposed to just jobbing directors who treated it like any other gig, unquote. Miller is not alone in his assertion that the movie genre is over. Prolific Batman and Punisher writer Chuck Dixon shared to Facebook back in June. Quote, the superhero cycle had a good run, but it's over. He elaborated on this while speaking to Bounding into Comics. Quote, every movie cycle ends. Westerns gave way to spies, who gave way to horror, and on and on. The superhero genre has had an extraordinarily long run. From there, he pointed to a number of different factors, but a number of factors have contributed to drop in interest for comics based content. Oversaturation, inconsistent quality, and Hollywood's restricted access to the Chinese market. Unquote. He also put the blame firmly on DC and Marvel and their parent companies. Quote, both Disney and Warner's are to blame as well. Marvel fans had to put up with a steady assault of woke content, an overbearing amount of comedy included in the material, a general decline in the quality of effects, and most damaging, a deliberate departure from the source material at every opportunity. DC screwed the pooch by constantly rebooting their franchises with new auteurs and casts. In addition, they diluted their brand with multiple different and conflicting continuities spread across TV and features, he asserted. Which Batman is real? Who is the authorized Superman? Unquote. Pointing to the most recent The Flash film, Dixon said, quote, and they damned themselves with this latest Flash flick by leaning into all the multiverse nonsense in order to cram as many cameos into this failed project as possible, unquote. DC Studios CEO James Gunn also appears to share some of Miller's opinions about superhero movies. Speaking with former Lex Luthor actor Michael Rosenbaum, Gunn was asked, quote, "Do you think there are too many superhero shows and movies? And because I remember when I did Smallville, there were none." Gunn answered, quote, "Yes, yeah, I do think there's too many," unquote. When asked what he should do about that, Gunn responded, quote, "But I don't think it's much less a problem of too many." Yes, there's too many, but there's not too many because I'm about to make a crap load of them. And yes, we are not going to overextend ourselves at DC. We're going to be very careful with the product that we put out and making sure everything is as good as it can possibly be, unquote. Yeah, sure. He then noted the creatives behind the films have been subpar. Quote, "I think that what's happened is people have gotten really lazy with their superhero stories and they have gotten to the place where, quote, oh, it's a superhero, let's make a movie about it. And they make, oh, let's make a sequel because the first one did pretty well. And they aren't thinking about why is this story special? What makes this story stand apart from other stories? What is the story at the heart of it all? Why is this character important? What makes this story different? That it fills a need for people in theaters to go see or on television, unquote." I mean, I think he's saying the right things, but it's hard to take him seriously when he's saying, "Oh, there's too many superhero movies." Then he announces this whole slate of stuff, back at the end of last year and said, "And there's more coming, more that wasn't announced." So, and then he says in this interview, "Oh yeah, there's too many," and then immediately he realizes what he said, so he backtracks. It's not that there's too many. Uh, Quote, "And I think that people have gotten a little lazy," unquote. I agree. I agree with that. And there's a lot of biff, pow, bam stuff happening in movies. I'm watching third acts of superhero films where I really just don't feel like there's a rhyme or reason to what's happening. I don't care about the characters. And they've gotten too generic. There's this sort of middle of the road type of genre tone that so many superhero movies, as opposed to having very different genres. I like very serious superhero movies. I like very comedic superhero movies. I like ones that are really just a murder mystery, but it's with superheroes. Dunn added, quote, I like to see these different types of stories as opposed to seeing the same story told over and over again. I don't know how many times." And it's interesting that they put Blue Beetle here because in my Blue Beetle review, which is on my channel, please go check it out. I talk about how the script, the plot to Blue Beetle, it's got obvious similarities. Well, there's some similarities to Iron Man, but more to the point, it's very similar to the plot for Ant-Man. Very similar. And to the point where it's like you kind of feel like you've seen this already. After Rosenbaum shared his thoughts and noted that the stories need to be more compelling, Gunn offered more of his own thoughts. Quote, "I think that also. And then people say superhero fatigue. I think that you see now that it's not a real thing. People are fatigued with repetition. And I don't think it's really just superhero movies. I think you're seeing it happening now. It's spectacle films in general," unquote. He may be right. He may be right. Obviously, Indiana Jones isn't really a superhero flick as such, but that flopped. Um, and even that Mission Impossible, I don't know if it flopped, but it underperformed. It definitely did not do as well as people were expecting. I think the anticipation was that coming off of Maverick last year, it was last year, right? Yeah. Which was such a massive hit that it was going to give Tom Cruise momentum going into this latest Mission Impossible movie, and it would allow him to end the series with a bang. And it really didn't seem to happen. He went on, quote, but there's a lot of spectacle films made and they just have gotten really generic and they've gotten boring and they aren't about characters and there's no emotion to them. And there should be emotion in things no matter. I assume that means no matter what. That should always be there, some type of emotion. I'm not saying it can't be really light. I'm not saying it can't be really heavy. I'm saying there should be some sort of emotion. Gunn would then reference the horror genre. Quote, "In a horror movie, if you like that main character, then you are much more scared when they're about to get killed. The stakes matter," unquote. Whether or not Marvel or DC course correct is yet to be seen. The true test for DC will likely be the DCU's first two movies in James Gunn's Superman Legacy and The Authority. If Marvel changes, it probably won't be until they introduce the Fantastic Four and or the X-Men, and that's a big if. But by then they might not even have a significant audience even interested in checking those films out, given the company is quickly garnering a reputation for pushing out highly tainted films and TV shows that focus on pushing degenerate messaging. And when they marginally stay away from that messaging, the movies and television shows just plain suck. Okay. All right. All right, it's 8:06. So it's been an hour, so I think I will go ahead and wrap up here. So again, I want to thank those who tuned in for the stream. Derpy Entertainment, sir, thank you for hanging around and watching, and others who also may have lurked during the stream, and those who'll catch it on the rewatch. I and also while you're here, hey, sub to my channel. Why not? And also, please do like this stream if you would. And I will not stream next weekend. I'm with my National Guard unit next weekend, so it'll be probably 2 weeks, and then I will be back. Until then, everyone have a good evening, and also have a good Labor Day. Enjoy your extra day off. Enjoy the weekend, and everyone take care. Good night.